Karen left her Mercedes in my workshop. She never expected the storage fees. Scene 1. The Mercedes in Bay 1. The car did not belong there. Silver Mercedes E-Class parked dead center in Bay 1, engine cold, not a scratch on it. My hydraulic lift, the one I'd been running since 1994, was completely blocked. It was 6:52 on a Monday morning. A customer's pickup truck was already idling in my lot waiting for a 7 o'clock appointment. I couldn't get to my own equipment. There was a yellow sticky note on the windshield. Back in a few days, Margaret HOA president. No question mark, no phone number, no apology. Just a statement, the kind you leave for someone who works for you. I called her. She picked up on the second ring. Oh yes, that's mine. Breezy like I'd phoned to confirm a lunch reservation. The dealership's full this week. I saw your lot was empty last night, so I just left it there. I'll be back Thursday. Maybe Friday could be next week, honestly. A short pause. And please make sure your guys don't touch it. It's a lease. Another pause. Shorter, harder, and I'd think carefully before making this into a problem if I were you. The HOA has a long reach in this neighborhood. I asked her one question. Margaret, did you ask anyone for permission to leave a vehicle on my commercial property? I'm HOA president, she said. I do business with people in this neighborhood all the time. I figured it was fine. She hung up. Margaret Holloway had spent 5 years using that HOA title like a passkey to every door in this subdivision. She'd voted herself a reserved parking spot at the community center. She'd find neighbors for wind chimes and basketball hoops and grass that was half an inch too tall. She'd made 96 families feel like tenants in their own homes. And now she'd strolled onto my licensed commercial property sometime the night before, dropped her leased Mercedes in my Mostest Bay, left a sticky note signed with her board title, as if that were a legal instrument, threatened me with a long reach before I'd even said anything, and expected the world to hold still while she got around to it. She had no idea she'd just tried to use that passkey on the one man in the subdivision who knew exactly what that car was now going to cost her. I set the phone down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't write an angry email. I walked back out to Bay 1 and stood there for a moment looking at the E-Class. It's a well-designed car built to communicate that the person who owns it is not to be questioned. It was doing a fine job of that sitting on my floor, blocking 31 years of livelihood. I took photographs. The car from the front, the sticky note up close, her handwriting in blue ink clear as a signed confession. Then, a wide shot of the entire bay lift. Inaccessible entrance blocked, and through the open roll-up door behind me, my customer's truck sitting in the lot where it couldn't help either of us. I went outside and apologized to my customer, told him we'd moved to Bay 2, no charge for the delay. He looked at the silver car and raised an eyebrow. I told him not to worry about it. Back inside, I opened my business logbook. Same one I've kept since the day I opened. Every vehicle that enters my lot gets an entry license plate, time, date, bay, assignment, insurance, and liability purposes. Standard practice for any licensed commercial operation. That morning I wrote down the license plate, the date, and the time, 6:54 a.m. Bay 1, unauthorized vehicle owner contacted and confirmed. Then I noted that the owner had confirmed. She left it without requesting permission, had declined to provide a retrieval date, had instructed my staff not to handle the vehicle, and had referenced HOA authority as a reason why this arrangement was acceptable. I read that last part back to myself. She had driven onto my property in the dark, left orders, and told me to think carefully. 31 years in this business teaches you things. One of them is that paper is patient in a way that people rarely are. Paper doesn't get flustered when someone raises their voice. Paper doesn't forget a date or soften a number out of politeness. Paper just sits there and tells the truth as many times as you need it to in front of whoever needs to hear it. Margaret had a title and a leased Mercedes and 31 years of experience getting away with things because people didn't know enough to push back. I had a logbook, and now I had notes. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the desk drawer and wrote 2 words at the top of the first clean page, Day 1. I didn't call her back. Instead, I called my attorney, a man who's handled commercial property matters for me for 2 decades, and asked him to confirm the daily storage rate I was legally entitled to charge for an unauthorized vehicle left on my licensed commercial lot. He reminded me of the statute I already had in mind, the state's garageman's lien law, which gives a licensed shop the right to assess a daily fee on any vehicle left without authorization. Retain possession of that vehicle until the full balance is settled, and if payment is refused past a statutory deadline, file a formal lien with the county and move toward public auction. When he quoted me the daily rate, I wrote it on the legal pad directly beneath day 1, and I circled it. Scene 2. The neighborhood Margaret built. My workshop has been on that corner since 1991. I want you to understand that because it matters more than it might seem. The HOA that Margaret Holloway ran like a personal thief wasn't established until 2003. The covenants she enforced with such energy, the ones that governed grass height and paint colors and what kind of mailbox you were allowed to have, were written 12 years after I poured the foundation of my building. My property is commercially zoned, inspected annually by the county, fully permitted at every level. The HOA's reach ends at my property line. Margaret had tried 3 times to change the petition the county twice, then tried a zoning board appeal. All 3 times the county looked at the paperwork and told her the same thing. Commercial zoning predates the HOA. The classification stands. All 3 times she accepted the decision publicly and quietly held a grudge. I'd known for years that she considered my workshop an offense against the aesthetic she was trying to maintain. A working garage, she'd once said at a board meeting, was inconsistent with the residential character of the community. The fact that the community had literally been built around my garage, that families had moved in knowing a repair shop was on the corner, didn't seem to register. That was Margaret's particular gift-selective memory in the service of control. She'd been HOA president for 5 years. In the 18 months before the morning, I found her Mercedes in bay when she had issued fines to 23 of the neighborhood's 96 homes. I'm not talking about 23 serious violations. I mean, a woman on Sycamore Court received a $400 fine for wind chimes visible from the street. Wind chimes her late husband had hung the summer before he died. Another family, a man named Ray, raising 2 kids on his own, got fined because his daughter left her portable basketball hoop at the end of the driveway on a Saturday afternoon and didn't bring it in before Margaret happened to drive by. 23 homes, 18 months, and almost every single one of those people paid. I'd asked Ry about it a few months before the Mercedes showed up. He wasn't proud of it. He told me that when he pushed back on the fine, Margaret had called him, directly explained in a pleasant and professional tone that unpaid HOA fines could escalate to a lien on his property, and that a lien, if left unresolved, could ultimately lead to foreclosure proceedings. Was she right about that? Technically, in extreme circumstances, after a very specific legal process, with many steps in between. Yes. Was what she was telling a single father in her neighborhood the full picture? Not even close, but Ry didn't know that. Most people don't. HOA law is dense, the language is intimidating. And when someone with a board title and a confident voice tells you that your kid's basketball hoop could cost you your house, you write the check. That was the system Margaret had built, not through any law she'd passed, not through any authority she actually had, just through the reliable fact that most people don't know exactly where the line is. And if you act certain enough, they'll assume you do. I'd spent some time learning where the line was. Not because I'm a lawyer, I'm not, but because Margaret had come after my property 3 times. And the 3rd time I decided I was going to understand the rules better than she did. I'd read our HOA bylaws cover to cover. I'd read the state statutes. I knew what the board could legally fine for what required due process, what language in a lien threat was enforceable, and what was theater. In that time, I'd also started quietly helping some neighbors. Nothing formal. If Mrs. Chen wanted to understand why she was being fined and whether she had to pay it, I'd sit with her at the kitchen table and we'd read the bylaws together. I'd point out what applied and what didn't. I'd tell her what her options were. It wasn't legal advice. I'm very clear about that, but it was the kind of practical information that the board was banking on people not having. My logbook came up a few times in those conversations too. Neighbors were surprised I kept records that thorough. I explained it the same way I explained it to my insurance carrier. Every vehicle that comes onto my lot gets logged. Date, time, plate number, bay assignment. It's standard practice for any licensed commercial shop. Liability purposes. If something happens to a car in my care, I need to be able to show exactly when it arrived and what condition it was in. When I logged Margaret's Mercedes that Monday morning, I was doing what I do every morning. The only difference was the name attached to the entry. There was one more thing I'd noticed about Margaret over the years. She had voted herself a reserved parking space at the community center. A board resolution passed with her own vote as the deciding margin. She had fined a family on Elm Drive for parking a moving trailer in their own driveway for 2 days while they moved furniture in. Her husband's boat had been sitting in their driveway since April of that year. It was October. That's the kind of detail that tells you everything about a person's relationship with the rules they enforce. She lived inside an exception she'd written for herself, and she'd assumed without checking that my workshop was just another place she could extend it. She was about to learn otherwise. Scene 3. Day 2, the certified letter. Day 2, balance $150. That was the math. $75 a day commencing from the morning I found the E-Class blocking Bay 1. My attorney had confirmed the number the evening before citing the state's garageman's lien statute by chapter and section. The law is straightforward. A licensed commercial shop is entitled to charge a daily storage fee on any vehicle left on its property without authorization. The owner cannot simply return and take the car without settling the balance. If they try, it's not a dispute over fees anymore. It becomes conversion, which is the legal term for theft of services. Margaret didn't know this law existed. Most people don't. It's the kind of statute that sits quietly on the books until someone needs it. I needed it. First thing that morning, I drafted the notice. Formal letter had my business name and address at the top one page. The language was plain and factual. A silver Mercedes E-Class license plate number clearly stated had been left on my licensed commercial property at my address without authorization on the date in question. Pursuant to the state statute, and I cited it by name, and section number, storage fees of $75 per day were being assessed commencing day 1. Current outstanding balance as of day 2, $150. The vehicle would remain in my possession until all acred fees were paid in full. I included a printed copy of the statute as an attachment. I drove to the post office before the shop opened and sent its certified mail return receipt requested. That return receipt matters. It's not just confirmation the letter was delivered. It's a signed record of exactly when it arrived and who accepted it. In the margin of my legal pad, I noted the tracking number and the time I dropped it off. Then I went back to work. Margaret called that afternoon. Someone at the post office had apparently recognized my return address and sent her a photo of the envelope before she'd even received it. She didn't open with hello. What exactly is this? Her voice was different from the morning before, not breezy anymore, clipped like I'd done something she found personally offensive. Is this some kind of joke I'm not paying $150 for 2 days in a parking lot? It's not a parking lot, Margaret, I said. It's a licensed commercial repair facility. The distinction matters legally. I don't care what you call it. I could hear her pulling breath. You are holding my property without my consent, and I'm telling you right now, you left your property on my property without my consent. I said the letter explains the rest. A pause, then the threat I'd been expecting since Monday morning. I am HOA president. If you push this, I will have the board open a commercial nuisance assessment on your property. I will make your permit renewals very uncomfortable. I have relationships at the county level that you do not want pointed at your business. She let that sit for a moment. You do not want to do this. I waited until she was finished. The storage fees are still accruing, I said. Today is day 2. Then I hung up. I wrote down the call in the logbook immediately. Time duration of verbatim note of her threat. Commercial nuisance assessment permit renewals. County relationships. I also noted what she hadn't said. At no point during that call did Margaret deny leaving the car without permission. She didn't claim a misunderstanding. She didn't say she'd thought the lot was available for public use. She threatened me. Those are 2 very different responses, and only one of them helps her. The car was still in Bay 1. I want to be precise about that. I was not blocking her from retrieving it out of spite. I wasn't keeping it as leverage in any informal sense. I was holding it because the statute gives me the right to hold it until the fees are paid, full stop. If she'd called back that afternoon and said she wanted to pay the $150 and pick it up, I would have handed her the keys in under 10 minutes. But she wasn't calling back to pay. She was calling to tell me what she was going to do to me if I kept the letter in play. Day 2 became evening. I was at the desk finishing some paperwork when my front desk phone rang. One of my guys answered and came to find me. "There's a man here," he said. "Says he's Margaret's husband." I walked out to the front. Derek Holloway was a large man, well-dressed the way men are when they want you to know they don't usually come to places like this. He stood in the doorway, with both hands loose at his sides and a look on his face that I recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had solved problems the same way for a long time and expected that to keep working. "You're holding my wife's car," he said, not a question. "I'm retaining an unauthorized vehicle under a valid storage lien," I said. "Yes." He took one step inside. "I'm going to need you to release it. I'll need you to settle the outstanding balance first." He looked at me for a long moment. The shop was quiet behind me. A couple of my guys had drifted into earshot without making it obvious. "Do you know who my wife is?" He said. "I know who she is," I said. "I also know who I am. I'm the licensed commercial property owner whose bay she blocked without asking." Derek's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to this. The size, the posture, the delivery. These were tools that worked on most people in most rooms. He was trying to figure out why they weren't working here. "We have a lawyer," he said. "Good," I said. "Have your lawyer look up the statute number in the letter I sent this morning. Everything I've done is in that document." I reached behind the desk and held out a second copy of the letter, the one I'd made for exactly this situation. He didn't take it. Derek filled my doorway and told me I was holding his wife's car hostage. I asked him if he'd like to see the statute that says otherwise. He had not expected that question. And standing there watching him work through what to do next, I realized something useful. Margaret had sent her heaviest weapon, and the heaviest thing I'd picked up was a sheet of paper. Scene 4. Derek, the statute, and the neighbor's files. Derek was still in my doorway when I reached behind the counter and laid 3 things on the desk in front of him. The certified letter, his wife's copy, same as the one she'd received, the printed statute, 2 pages, state seal at the top, and the Day 3 invoice, which I'd prepared that morning, $225, itemized by date with Day 4 already listed below it as a pending line. "The statute is on page 2, I said. "Section 4 is the part you want." He picked it up. I watched him read, not skim, actually read the way people do when they're looking for the exit and not finding one. The shop was quiet. Somewhere behind me, a compressor cycled. A phone rang once and stopped. Derek set the papers down. "This is theft," he said, but the word landed differently than it had 60 seconds earlier. Quieter, like he was trying it out to see if it still worked. "It's a storage lien," I said. "Under that statute, the vehicle stays in my possession until all acred fees are paid in full. If you remove it without paying, that's conversion. That's a criminal matter, not a civil one. I'd encourage you to read that part carefully before you make any decisions." He looked at the invoice, looked at me, looked at the invoice again. The thing about Derek was that he wasn't stupid. He was a man who had gotten a long way on confidence and size, and the particular social gravity that comes from being married to someone who controls the neighborhood. Those are real advantages in most situations. They just don't do much against a 2-page state statute and a logbook with 31 years of entries behind it. "We have a lawyer," he said. He'd said that the night before, too. It was becoming a kind of prayer. "Good," I said. "Have your lawyer look up the section number on page 1. Everything I've done is in that document. Every fee, every day, every notification, all of it is by the book." I paused. "The car will be here when you're ready to settle the balance." He left without the Mercedes. He walked back out through the roll-up door and across the lot to his truck, and he sat there for a moment before he started the engine. I didn't watch long. I had work to do. What I didn't expect was who was standing by the side entrance when I turned around. Mrs. Chen was 74 years old and 4 feet 11, and she was holding a manila folder with both hands, like she was presenting evidence at a trial, which it turned out she more or less was. Rai was standing behind her, arms crossed, his daughter's basketball hoop. Fine, apparently still fresh enough that he'd driven over on a weekday morning. "We saw him leave," Mrs. Chen said, nodding toward the lot. "You didn't have to come down here," I said. "We wanted to." She held out the folder. I opened it at the workbench. The first document was a set of HOA board meeting minutes 14 months old. Agenda Item 6, Parking Exception Request Community Center Reserved Space. The motion was made by Margaret Holloway, seconded by a board member I recognized. Passed 3-2 with Margaret's own vote as the deciding margin. She had voted to grant herself a parking privilege that no other homeowner in the subdivision had. The second document was an email. Ray had printed it on plain paper, the header showing Margaret's HOA, board address, the date visible, his name, and the recipient line. He'd sent it after questioning his basketball hoop fine. Her response read, "I'd hate for this to become uncomfortable for your family. The board has a number of pending assessments we haven't acted on yet that we've been patient about." I read that line twice, then I looked at Ray. She sent that in writing. I said she sent it from her official HOA email address. He said I almost deleted it. Glad I didn't. I added both documents to my file. To be precise about what they were, these weren't evidence in my storage lien case. The lien was already airtight on its own. What these documents established was something different, a documented pattern of Margaret using her HOA position to retaliate against anyone who pushed back. If she followed through on her threat to bring a commercial nuisance assessment against my property, that pattern was going to matter. That evening, I called my attorney and walked him through the full file. Logbook certified letter and return receipt statute printout call, log from the day 2 conversation, the sticky note still in its protective sleeve. And now, the neighbor's folder. He was quiet for a moment after I finished. "Your lien position is clean," he said. "She has no viable argument against the fees. The statute is unambiguous." Then he added something I wrote down immediately. "But if she actually moves forward on the permit threat, if she uses her HOA position to create regulatory trouble for you in retaliation for exercising a valid legal right that's potentially tortious interference with your business, keep logging everything, dates, names, exactly what was said. Tortious interference means using improper means to damage someone's lawful business." I didn't explain that to anyone that evening. I just wrote it in the margin of the legal pad beneath the circled daily rate and above the day 4 line and underlined it once. The car was still in Bay 1. Day 3 balanced $225. Day 4 would bring it to $300. The math was not complicated, and it was not going in Margaret's direction. I closed the logbook, turned off the desk lamp, and locked up. Whatever she was planning next, she was planning it with a lawyer who hadn't read the statute yet. I'd already read it several times. Scene 5, the city complaint and the auction letter. Day 5 balance $375. Margaret had not paid. She had not called to negotiate. What she had done, I learned through a neighbor who sat on the board and had the decency to feel uncomfortable about it, was convene an emergency HOA meeting on day 4 and push through a resolution classifying my workshop as a commercial nuisance operating outside community standards. The vote was 3-2. The 2 dissenting board members apparently asked several reasonable questions about the legal basis for the resolution. Margaret told them the board had authority to act in the community's best interest. That was the extent of the legal analysis. I received the board's formal notice in the mail the following morning. 1-page official HOA, letterhead, Margaret's signature at the bottom. I added it to the file. What arrived next I hadn't anticipated. Not because it was clever, but because it was reckless in a way that surprised even me. 2 days after the board resolution, a city code enforcement officer showed up at my workshop unannounced. Someone had filed a complaint. Multiple allegations: improper waste disposal, hazardous materials stored outside regulatory guidelines, excessive noise during restricted hours. The officer, a younger man named Henderson, professional and thorough, showed me the complaint form when I asked. The allegations were detailed enough to sound credible and vague enough to be impossible to disprove quickly. That's the design. I told him to look at everything. We spent 90 minutes going through the property together. Waste disposal. I pulled the service log showing scheduled pickup dates and manifests going back 18 months. All compliant. Hazardous materials. The storage area was labeled ventilated and inventoried exactly as state code requires. I showed him the certification records. Noise. My permitted operating hours are posted on the front door and have been since I opened. Henderson checked each item against his complaint sheet and wrote a single word next to every line. Clear. Before he left, He had me sign the inspection report and gave me a certified copy. He paused at the door. "I'm not allowed to tell you who filed it," he said, "but I can tell you this complaint read like it came from a personal disagreement, not a genuine safety concern." He said it the way people say something when they want it heard, without it being on the record. I thanked him, made a copy of the inspection report for the file, and noted the date, time, and badge number in the logbook. That afternoon, I drafted the second letter to Margaret. The first letter had introduced the fees and cited the statute. This letter did something different. It updated the outstanding balance 5 days at $75, $375 total. And then it cited a provision I hadn't mentioned yet. Under the same statute, if a storage lien balance remains unpaid beyond a specific deadline following formal notification, the lien holder is entitled to file that lien with the county recorder's office and initiate proceedings to sell the vehicle at public auction to recover the debt. The word auction appeared twice, once in the body, once in the subject line. I sent it certified mail return receipt requested, same as the first one. That evening, my attorney called to check in. I told him about the city complaint and the clean inspection report. He went quiet in a way I'd come to recognize as him thinking carefully before speaking. "Keep that inspection report safe," he said. "She filed a regulatory complaint against your business in direct response to you exercising a valid legal right. That document is going to matter if this goes further." Then he mentioned something I hadn't fully considered. "The Mercedes," he said, "is it a leased vehicle?" I checked the logbook. The license plate registration I'd looked up on day one had flagged the vehicle as registered to a leasing company, not to Margaret directly. I confirmed that. He explained it simply. When a formal storage lien is filed with the county against a vehicle, the leasing company, the actual legal owner, receives mandatory notification standard procedure, and leasing companies take unauthorized encumbrances on their vehicles very seriously. An encumbrance on a leased car that the LA allowed to happen could constitute a breach of the lease agreement. That was entirely Margaret's problem to manage. It was also a problem she hadn't seen coming, because it had never occurred to her that leaving a leased car on someone else's commercial property without permission might put her lease at risk. I wrote that down not because I planned to use it immediately. I didn't. But I wanted to have it clear in my mind before whatever Margaret was going to do next. 2 days later, on day 7, my front desk phone rang in the early evening. Not Margaret this time. Derek. He wasn't loud. That was the first thing I noticed. The version of Derek who had filled my doorway on day 2. The one who said, "We have a lawyer," like it was a finishing move. That version wasn't on the phone. This Derek spoke carefully, like a man choosing his words with a budget in mind. He asked if there was any way to work something out. I told him the invoice was current and the balance was stated clearly in the letter his wife received that afternoon. I told him I was happy to accept payment in full and release the vehicle the same day. He thanked me, said he'd be in touch. He hung up. I sat for a moment looking at the legal pad. Day 7 balance, written and circled $525. Below it in the margin where I'd written tortious interference 4 days earlier, I added 3 words. Leasing company mandatory notification. What I hadn't told Derek, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that the moment I filed that lien with the county, the letter wouldn't just go to Margaret. It would go to the company that actually owned the car. And that conversation, the one between Margaret and her leasing company, was going to be a problem I had nothing to do with and no control over, which meant it was going to be Margaret's problem entirely. I wondered if she'd figured that out yet. Based on Derek's tone, I was starting to think she had. Scene 6, the lawyer who read the statute. Day 8, balance $600. The email arrived the day before from an address I didn't recognize, a law firm name I'd seen on HOA correspondence before. The subject line read, Demand for immediate release of unlawfully detained vehicle. The body of the letter, called the storage fees, unlawful, coercive, and extortionate, stated that I was in possession of private property without legal basis and demanded immediate return of the vehicle without payment, or I would face legal action for theft and unlawful detention of property. I read it twice, printed it, added it to the file. The lawyer's name was Garfield. He was the HOA's general counsel. I'd seen his name on board correspondence before. A generalist, the kind of attorney who handles covenant disputes and bylaw interpretations and the occasional neighbor versus neighbor complaint. He was not, as far as I could determine, a commercial property specialist. That distinction was going to matter. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock, I was at my desk when I heard tires on the lot gravel. I looked out the office window. Margaret's car, the one she drove when her Mercedes was unavailable, and behind it a dark sedan I didn't recognize, both parked. Margaret stepped out first, then Garfield in a suit jacket on a Saturday carrying a leather folder. Derek was not with her. That told me something. What I hadn't expected was everyone else. Standing near the side fence, the low chain link that runs along the property line nearest the subdivision, were Mrs. Chen Ray and at least 4 or 5 other faces I recognized from the neighborhood. They weren't loud. They weren't holding signs. They were just there in the morning light watching. Word had gotten around the way it does in a neighborhood where 96 families have spent 5 years keeping their heads down and their fines paid. Margaret saw them. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Garfield took the lead. He introduced himself, handed me his business card, and launched into the letter. Extortionate, unlawful detention demand for immediate release. He used the word hostage once. His voice was practiced, and even the kind of delivery that's designed to make the other person feel like the situation has already been decided. I let him finish. Then I set my own folder on the workbench between us and opened it. Day 8 invoice. I said, sliding it across, itemized by date, $600, acring at $75 per day. I placed the original certified letter beside it, the green return receipt card still attached, Margaret's signature visible in the acceptance field. Then the second letter, the one with the auction provision, and finally the statute, 2 pages, state seal section numbers clearly marked, page 2, section 4. I said, that's the part that authorizes the fees. Section 6 is the auction provision. Garfield picked up the statute. He read. The lot was quiet. Somewhere on the street a lawnmower started up and then stopped. Mrs. Chen stood very still near the fence, her hands folded in front of her. Rai had his arms crossed and his eyes on Margaret. Garfield turned to page 2. Margaret broke the silence first. This is outrageous. Her voice was sharp and clear, carrying across the lot. You cannot hold someone's property hostage for ransom. This is extortion. I am HOA president, and this entire community is watching what you're doing here. She said that last part while turning to look at the neighbors by the fence. The clear implication was that they were there for her, that they'd come to witness the same wrongdoing she was alleging. Mrs. Chen spoke quietly without moving from where she stood. He helped me when you fined me $400 for my wind chimes, Margaret. Nobody else said anything. Nobody moved toward Margaret either. The silence that followed Mrs. Chen's words was not empty. It had weight. Margaret looked at the fence for a moment, then she looked back at me. Garfield set the statute down. He picked up the Day 8 invoice and looked at it. He set that down too. Then he stepped to the side about 10 feet away and made a phone call. He spoke quietly with his back partly turned. I waited. He was on the phone for nearly 3 minutes. When he came back, his posture had changed. Something had settled out of it. The practiced evenness, the forward lean of a man presenting a prepared position. He looked like someone who had just been told something he'd hoped not to hear. We're going to need to review this matter further, he said, before we can proceed. He didn't say unlawful again. He didn't say extortionate. He didn't ask me to release the vehicle. Take the time you need. I said the rate is $75 a day. Today is day 8. Margaret rounded on him. What does review it further mean? I came here to get my car back. Just get my car back. Garfield moved close and spoke to her in a low voice. I wasn't meant to hear it clearly, and I only caught fragments. But some words carry even when they're not meant to. The statute is clear. The auction provision is enforceable. Leasing company. At the words leasing company, the color left Margaret Holloway's face. Not a flinch, not a blink. An actual draining, the kind that happens when something abstract becomes suddenly specifically real. She stood very still for a moment, and in that moment, she looked like someone who had just understood for the first time in 8 days exactly what she had walked into. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the statute hadn't already said better. Scene 7, the invoice, the lien, and the leasing company. Day 12, balance $900 in storage fees alone. I had called Margaret that morning and asked her to come to the workshop, not as a courtesy, as a procedure. My attorney had filed the formal storage lien with the county recorder's office 2 days earlier, and the proper next step was to present the filing in person, state the total amount required for release, and give her the opportunity to settle before the auction timeline began moving. She arrived at 2 o'clock with Derek and a man I hadn't seen before. No leather folder this time, no practice delivery. The new attorney's name was Ashworth, and I found out later he specialized in commercial property law, had apparently been handed the file that morning and given enough time to read it thoroughly. He shook my hand when he came in. Garfield had not done that. My attorney was with me. We sat on one side of the workbench. They sat on the other. I placed the lien document on the table first, county stamped, filed, and recorded, the vehicle's VIN number, license plate, and description at the top. Below that, the acred storage fees, 12 days at $75 per day, plus the filing fee, the 2 certified mail costs, and the administrative processing charge. Total amount required to release the lien and return the vehicle, $1,080. I turned it so it faced them and said nothing. Ashworth picked it up. He read it the way Garfield had read the statute 4 days earlier, carefully looking for the exit. He set it down, looked at my attorney briefly, then at me. "The lien appears to have been properly filed," he said. That sentence landed in the room like something heavy being set on a floor. Derek exhaled through his nose. Margaret's hands, flat on the workbench, pressed down slightly. Ashworth asked if there was any flexibility on the total amount. My attorney deferred to me. "The statute sets the daily rate," I said. "I charge the statute rate. Every day is documented." I opened the logbook and placed it beside the lien filing. 12 entries, each one dated, time-stamped, base status noted, daily balance updated in the right H hand column, day 1 through day 12, in the same handwriting with the same pen, the same format I've used for 31 years on every vehicle that enters my lot. One of the 2 HOA board members who had come with Margaret, I recognized him from the resolution vote, leaned forward slightly to look at the logbook without touching it. He sat back without saying anything. I placed the certified letter chain beside the logbook. The original letter from day 2 green return receipt card still attached Margaret's signature in the acceptance field. The second letter from day 5 with the auction provision, both sent, both received, both signed for. Ashworth glanced at the return receipts. He didn't pick them up. I placed the city inspection report beside that. Henderson's report dated showing 0 violations across every category. Filed 4 days after Margaret's complaint. The second board member looked at it, then looked at Margaret. She didn't look back at him. Then I reached into the folder and placed the last item on the table, a small yellow square. Her handwriting, blue ink, exactly as she'd written it. Back in a few days, Margaret H., HOA president. Margaret looked at it. She didn't say anything. She didn't reach for it. She just looked at it the way you look at something that has traveled a long distance to find you. I said, "That's what started the clock, Margaret." The room was very quiet. Then my attorney spoke. He addressed Ashworth directly in the calm, even manner of someone delivering information rather than scoring a point. He explained that because the vehicle was registered to a third-party leasing company, not to Margaret personally, the county lien filing had triggered a mandatory notification to the lessor as required by state law. The leasing company had received formal notice 10 days ago. Under the standard terms of most commercial vehicle leases, allowing an unauthorized encumbrance to be placed on a leased vehicle could constitute a material breach of the lease agreement. That was a problem entirely separate from the $1,080 on the table. It was a problem between Margaret and the company that owned her car, and it had already started moving the moment the lien was filed. Derek took out his phone. He looked at it for a moment without dialing, then set it face down on the workbench. The first board member turned to the second board member and said something in a low voice. I didn't catch the words. The second board member was still looking at the inspection report. Ray was standing near the side entrance where the roll-up door was raised. Mrs. Chen was beside him. Neither of them had been invited. Neither of them left. Margaret turned to Ashworth. When she spoke, her voice was controlled but tight, like something being held together with effort. $400, she said. I'll pay $400 and we close this out. Ashworth said nothing. He was not going to say anything. I looked at her for a moment. The amount is what the statute says it is, Margaret, I said. It's not personal. She looked at Derek. He was looking at his phone, still face down. Ashworth leaned close to her and spoke quietly. I could not hear him. I didn't need to. I had seen that posture on Garfield 4 days ago in a different part of the lot. After a different phone call, it was the posture of a lawyer telling a client that the number in front of them is the number. I slid the formal payment demand notice across the workbench. $1,080 required in full to release the lien and authorize return of the vehicle. If payment was not received within the statutory deadline, auction proceedings would commence as scheduled. Take the time you need, I said, but the lien is filed. The leasing company has been notified and the deadline is what it is. I closed my folder. Margaret sat across the workbench from me in a workshop that had been on this corner since before her HOA existed, in front of a document she had created the moment she left a sticky note on a windshield and called it authorization. And she had nothing left to say that was going to change any of the numbers on that page. She knew it. Ashworth knew it. And by the way the two board members were looking at each other across the table, they were beginning to know it too. Scene 8, Bay 1, empty and clean. The check arrived on a Tuesday. Certified mail return receipt requested her attorney's office as the sender, not hers. $1,080 made out to my business name, exactly as stated in the payment demand notice. No letter enclosed. No note, just the check folded once in a plain envelope. It arrived on the last permitted day of the statutory window. I logged it in the logbook. Payment received, amount confirmed, date and time noted. Then, I called my attorney and authorized him to file the lien release with the county recorder's office. He had it done by end of business that day. The county recorded the release. The lien was gone. I called Ashworth's office and left a message that the vehicle was available for retrieval. Derek came that afternoon. He drove his own truck with a friend who I didn't recognize, someone to drive the Mercedes out. They pulled into the lot around 3 o'clock. Derek walked past me to Bay 1 without making eye contact. His friend got into the Mercedes. Both vehicles pulled out of the lot within 4 minutes. The bay was empty by 3:15. I stood there for a moment, just stood there in the space where the E-Class had been for 12 days, looking at the concrete and the lift and the clear path to the back wall. Then I walked to the desk and opened the logbook to the Mercedes entry. 12 lines each one, dated and time-stamped, the daily balance climbing in the right-hand column from 75 to 900. I wrote the final notation beneath the last entry. Vehicle retrieved, payment received, lien released. Then I drew a single horizontal line under it, closing out the record the same way I close out every completed job. The rest of it unfolded the way things do when a community has been holding its breath for a long time and finally has permission to exhale. The story of the Mercedes had traveled through all 96 homes in the subdivision. By the time Derek drove it off my lot, probably faster, honestly, given how these things move. The 3 board members who had voted with Margaret on the commercial nuisance resolution began in the days that followed to discover pressing reasons to clarify their positions. 2 of them called me separately. I told them I appreciated it and had nothing further to pursue. A group of homeowners, 8 of them, including Mrs. Chen and Rai, formally petitioned for an emergency HOA board meeting. They had the signature threshold required by the bylaws. The meeting was held on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after the Mercedes was gone. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. What I was told later by 2 people who were a motion was made to censure Margaret Holloway for using HOA resources to file a retaliatory city code complaint against the neighbor's business in response to a valid legal action. The motion passed 4-1. Margaret cast the dissenting vote herself. 11 days after the censure vote, the HOA received a letter of resignation from Margaret Holloway, citing personal health priorities. The interim board, chaired temporarily by one of the 2 members who had voted against the nuisance resolution, convened within a week. Among their first actions, Mrs. Chen's $400 wind chime fine was reviewed, found to have no basis under the actual bylaw language, and reversed. Ray's basketball hoop fine was reversed. 3 other homeowners submitted written requests for fine reviews. The interim board acknowledged all 3. None of that was something I had pursued. I hadn't filed a complaint about the city code retaliation, hadn't contacted the board members, hadn't organized anything. I had exercised a legal right, documented everything, and let the paper do what paper does. The leasing company situation was Margaret's. I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like, and it wasn't my business to know. What I do know is that the mandatory notification went out the day the lien was filed, and that a lease compliance review is a different kind of problem than the one she'd come to my workshop to argue about. Whatever it cost her in fees and renegotiation, in the particular discomfort of explaining to a financial institution how their vehicle ended up encumbered, that was arithmetic she'd done to herself. About 3 weeks after the Mercedes was gone, I came in early. 6:52 in the morning, same as day one. I pulled into the lot, got out, unlocked, the front rolled up the bay doors. The air smelled like oil and metal and the specific cold of a shop that's been closed overnight, which is a smell I've known for 31 years, in which that particular morning I noticed the way you notice something you'd briefly been afraid of losing. Bay 1 had a customer's truck on the lift, a pickup same model year as the one that had been waiting outside on day one, give or take, scheduled for 7 o'clock. The customer arrived at 6:58, handed me his keys, and asked how long it would take. I told him I'd have him out by noon. He nodded and left. Bay 1 was occupied by a vehicle that belonged there for a customer who had made an appointment on a lift I could reach without someone else's entitlement in the way. That was all. That was exactly enough. Mrs. Chen came by that Friday with a tin of cookies, the kind with the powdered sugar on top that she makes for people when she doesn't have the words for what she means. She set them on the front desk, patted my arm once, and left. She didn't mention wind chimes. She didn't need to. The legal pad was still on my desk. I picked it up that evening before I locked up, flipped through it, past the circle, daily rate, past 12, dated entries, past the note about tortious interference, and the 3 words I'd added in the margin about the leasing company, all the way back to the top of the first page. Day 1, written on a Monday morning when I was calm enough to write 2 words instead of raising my voice. I turned to the next clean page, wrote the date, set the pen down. Margaret's Mercedes was gone. My workshop was mine again. And somewhere across that subdivision, 95 homeowners could hang their wind chimes in peace.